Hey, thanks for checking out another video on Painter Pete. Today I'm going to be working on a landscape painting, an ocean shore, some waves crashing, and I just want to show you some really simple techniques, simple use of color and brushstroke to create something pretty cool like this. I got my canvas set up. I've got these three brushes I'll probably use. They're just some flat brushes, nothing too fancy. I was already working on a painting, so I got my paint out. I've got some white, two shades of blue, some greens, yellow, yellow ochre, dark brown, and some red. I may use all of them. I may not. Let's see what happens. I want to start with my sky, and I just want it to be a nice light blue, so I got a clean brush. I'm going to grab some clean white. Just get some of that on the canvas as a starting point. And while that's still wet, I'll grab a little bit of my light blue. Just mix it right in on the canvas until I get the shade of blue that I'm after. Not trying to necessarily make this too smooth, just spreading it out enough and get some interesting streaks of color in there. Down near my horizon, I want to incorporate a little bit more white. Make the sky a little bit lighter near my horizon. I think I might like to add a little bit more blue up near my top of my sky here. And just let that mix right in as well. Brush bristle there. Okay, so I've got my sky in here. Ooh, that was a mistake. Let's grab some white. Got my sky in here, and I just want to build in the first layer of my ocean. See, I missed canvas in a few places there. Alright, that's better. I want to build in a line where my ocean is on the horizon here, and I want that to be a nice deep sea green color. So some of my dark blue, maybe some of my greens, littlest bit of white. And I didn't stir up a whole bunch of paint because I may want to make adjustments on the fly. And to start out, I'm just going to try and cut a pretty straight and flat horizon line. And then I'll grab some more of my color. Kind of get more of a block of that color there. Now, I don't need this to be perfectly smooth other than being pretty flat and horizontal on the top edge. The rest of it, I want some brushstroke texture in there. Help show some waves. Now you saw the example I showed you briefly. Kind of a perspective like we're looking down this beach. We're standing on the beach, we're looking down the beach. So to start creating that perspective, I'm going to make there be a little bit of a diagonal line here as far as where things are placed on here. So just bringing that same ocean color down. Okay, just get some of that extra paint off my brush. Now I just want to build in some of that color that I'll use to create my wave and where the water hits the shore. I just want that to be lighter, so some greens and some light blue here. You can see I just grabbed a little bit of all those colors really. And for my first layer, I don't need it to be a particular perfect mixture of color. I just want it, in balance with what I already have. So my waves, I'm definitely going to add more on top of them, but when I first create them, if I get my brush stroke to sort of show the shape of that wave a little bit, without getting too detailed or too literal, I can have some of these streaks in my brush stroke. It just helps show the viewer where things are going. So that top edge of my brush is creating the top of that wave, and then my brush stroke wiping down and returning it to that flat edge, and I show the rest of that wave. And just keep grabbing some same combinations of those colors. And then as I get into the distance, the size of these brush strokes and the size of my wave just kind of trails off. Grab a little bit of my darker color and just sort of soften that edge a little bit. Okay, so with some of these same colors, I want to bring some of that water into the foreground here as if it's rolling up on the beach. So again, just grabbing a combination of some of those greens and blues, maybe a little bit of white. And my wave was going pretty vertical. It has that curvature and then it flattens back out. So out here I want that water to be pretty flat, so that's what my brush stroke does. And when I get near my wave, I need my brush stroke to kind of change direction to connect to that surface. Make it look like it's all one thing. And continuing with that perspective, I'm going to widen and stretch things out when they're down here on the left hand side. And the distance back here a little bit smaller. And coming into the foreground here, nice and wide. Okay, then just while I got some of that paint still on my brush and while this is still wet, if I grab a littlest bit of white here, just let that mix in and create a little bit of a lighter, softer edge where some of that water edge is created. It's just a little easier to merge that into my sand color if I've got a little bit of a lighter, wet edge there. Same brush stroke. Same idea, trying to keep it flat, but trying to make it a little bit lighter. Okay, so I'll build in the first layer of my beach color, and I might just keep some of that green on my brush. Get into a little bit of my yellow ochre here, some white. That green that's on my brush will dirty that color up a little bit. You get a little bit of my darker brown. And where I just put that lighter shade of green there, if I can get my brush stroke to just very lightly overlap that a little bit, should be able to pick up a little of each of those colors and create a soft edge there. Grab some yellow, a little bit of white to finish off my beach here. Okay, so I got a good starting point for all the pieces of my painting. I'm going to clean off that large brush. And I'm going to switch to my next smaller brush here, a medium-sized flat brush. Come back up to my sky and build in some really simple clouds. So with just plain old white, just want some little touches to show some cloud edges. Definitely don't have to draw a shape or box anything in too literal or specific. I don't know if you can notice, but my paint water is getting kind of dirty and green, and this brush has a little bit of that color in it, and that combined with my bright white actually giving me an effect in my clouds that I'm liking, so I might just leave that in there. But when I take this bright white for these clouds, I use that to kind of show the top edge of my cloud a little bit, that nice bright white sharp edge, and then the rest of that paint I just pull back in the other direction and let it merge with the rest of my sky that's already there. Maybe some very gentle upward brush strokes here and there. And that's how I create a cloud shape. It doesn't have to be anything too literal. I don't have to give that much information. Just have some horizontal streaks here and there. Bring some of these clouds into the distance. And then maybe there's some other little broken pieces. You can put them wherever. Always just starting the light. You can always intensify that bright white if I need to later on. Okay, I think that's good enough. I won't spend too much time on those clouds, but just a really simple brush stroke to create those. Nothing too fancy. I'll stick with that smaller brush and I'll come back to my ocean, and I don't need to repaint the whole thing, but if I give it a little bit more texture, maybe darken and deepen the color a little bit, that'll be a good approach for my second layer. So my dark green, my dark blue, maybe a little bit of my light blue, and just very light brush pressure. Skimming across that surface with a left to right brush stroke. Get some of that extra paint off my brush here. Just deepen that color a little bit. If I can get some streaks and some brush stroke in there, that can help show some of my wave surface. And then if I take just the littlest bit of white along with some of those darker colors, and definitely don't have to make big waves, but just some little indications of some surface texture. Things in the distance nice and small, so some real small brush strokes. As I come into the foreground, maybe things get a little bit enlarged. Definitely want a little bit of color along with my white. I don't need these to be bright, bright white. And I don't want to overdo it. Whatever I do, I'm arranging it horizontally, trying to connect to that horizontal surface of the water. Okay. So, I probably won't do anything more to that ocean in the background. I'll come into my foreground here and start working on building up that wave. And at first, I'm just going to grab some of my lighter greens that I used in this area and not repaint my whole wave, but just here and there, and imply that wave shape a little bit more and just show a little bit more color in there. And with my smaller brush, just have some different streaks of color in there and try and show that wave shape with that curved brush stroke that follows that wave. And when I get out into this flat surface here, I have my brush stroke connect to that. Maybe in a few spots, got a little bit of a darker wave color. And same thing there, just following that wave shape as best I can. A little bit of that color wanders out here. So a really simple brush stroke now to bring that wave to life. If I wipe off some of that dark color and just sort of dab up some white on the end of that brush, and definitely don't want to just draw a stripe across the top of my wave, but if I just sort of set and twist and rock that brush around along that wave top edge and create a nice effect, that break of that wave. And if I just let those bristles spread out a little bit, I can get a bunch of little registers of of that white showing some little splashes, or just that water flopping around a bunch of different places. So some spots it's not quite as intense. A few spots might even be rolling over itself a little bit. And then on down the line, gets more into the distance. My brush stroke should be a little smaller, a little less exaggerated. Okay, so I'll stick with that white, but I want to thin it out a little bit, so just get a little bit of water on my brush and come into some of my white. And I just want to get these little bits of water that are kind of swimming around on the surface, that foamy water that follows the shape of the wave. And it's going to be a little tricky to get the hang of where some of these might belong, but if I just start small and light and follow my surface here, flat out here, following the curve of my wave in places, and trying not to make a pattern too much. Get some of these little surface pieces of water here. Smaller in the background. Using that little bit of water kind of dulled that bright white. If those are super bright white, it kind of looks a little less believable. I'm going to go back to my larger brush. And I want to create some other breaks of the wave here in the foreground. And to do that, I just want to take a little bit of white just on the corner of my brush. I want to hold that corner to the outside edge of the wave that I want, and just sort of rock it back and forth along here, and just let that bright white that's on the corner of my brush create that edge, as if there's some wave breaking there. And then I'll just blend some of that white back into the rest of the wave. A lot like what I did with my clouds. I left that bright white there to create the edge. I'm leaving the bright white here to create the edge of my wave. Have another wave that's rolling back. Be careful here in the distance it doesn't get too large and exaggerated. In fact, I can just get a lot of white out there. Make another pass doing that same thing here, sort of on the edge of my ocean color. Definitely don't have to just trace that line where that color changes, but just get it in that zone. Same thing, I'll leave the bright white on the outer edge and just drag back very lightly some of the rest of that paint, softening it into my other colors. I'll make a couple other little passes with that same effect. I'm trying to see wave shapes form, or edges form, as I go here. Things emerge and I kind of work with them or change them. And maybe some other little touches, just some little indications of water breaking or waves or foam that's on the surface here. All of it just light and simple at first. You can always go back and intensify things later. Really just trying to connect to these surfaces. If I'm working on that wave shape, I'm following that curve with my brush stroke. When I'm out here, I'm working flat. Alright, so my wave is coming to life. Let's bring the beach to life a little bit more. I'm going to clean off my brush, and I think I need a darker strip of sand here to show where some of that sand might be wet. So I'll use my main sand color as a starting point. Some of my yellow ochre, my bright yellow, tiny bit of white, and then I'm just going to darken that a little bit, maybe even the littlest touch of green in there. And a lot like that brushstroke I was just using to create those wave edges, I did the same thing, but now I have a little bit more of the brush on the canvas. And just rocking it back and forth along here. Might want to go a little bit darker. Rocking that brush back and forth and wider in the foreground. Sort of overlapping that water's edge there. Create the illusion that there's this strip of beach here that's a little bit wet. Okay. Clean off my brush. Go back to my white. I'm just going to re-establish that edge of this last breaking wave here with that same technique. Might even do a little bit of that on the edge of that wet chunk of sand here. And then some very light little streaks just to maybe show a little bit of shine, a little bit of reflection on some of these surfaces I want to look wet. Okay, maybe a little bit more texture here on my beach. Grab the smaller brush, get into some of my darker sand colors. And nothing too specific here, just some little touches to show some texture here. Some things that might have got washed up by the tide. Kind of following that edge where the tide stops. Try not to overdo it, and try not to make a pattern or a polka dot. And then carrying that back into the distance. Could use a little bit of some of those beach colors and just have some other textures here. So a little bit of surface. And I think that's getting there. And you could definitely add a lot of things to a painting like that. Could continue to enhance any of the details in any of those levels. Let's see, one thing that'd be simple to do if I have a clean brush and come back with some white and just create another layer on top of some of those waves. Really brighten them up, intensify that. Maybe there's something else in a painting like this. Boats, birds, something else on the beach. But you get the idea. Simple brushstrokes, simple techniques, and pretty basic colors to get a pretty cool painting created quite quickly. I hope you enjoyed the video and maybe got something out of it. Thanks for watching. Happy painting.